Okay, welcome to Stampscapes University. We're going to go over what we just covered in the previous lesson with seeing volumes, okay? Looking at stamps not in terms of a kind of a flat object, which of course they are, but in seeing them in a way and then rendering them accordingly to give the forms within each design kind of more of a three-dimensional look rather than kind of a flat application of uniform color and value over whatever type of object we are, I don't know, further rendering with the coloring process. And it doesn't matter what media we're using, okay? It's just the concept that's important here. And then you can employ all of these different types of thought processes and techniques to whatever media you happen to be using. Now, there are some different types of media that we wouldn't, employ these different types of techniques. Like, say, for example, if I have a black piece of paper or something like that, and I'm stamping these out in white over the top of it for that reversed out type of look, or if we're just embossing some images over, in metallics over something, we're not doing additional coloring. So this is referring to stamp imagery coloring, and that would apply to dye-based alcohol inks, pigment inks, colored pencils, chalks, and pastels maybe. Anything like that, okay, is where you can utilize this type of coloring and lighting process. It's kind of more shading, and we're developing light through the use of shade. But let me show you how that would come into effect using these processes, and especially, what we talked about in the previous lesson where I just kind of did isolated images. Okay, let's go ahead and do this in time lapse here so that we can just kind of get to the coloring portion of this lesson. All right, so this is going to be a waterfall scene, and when I get to these trees, we'll stop the time lapse process and we'll talk about the coloring of trees to give us a really, good head start in the toning and lighting process that we'll utilize with additional coloring, but I'll show you how to get that inherently in the designs themselves, in the design impressions, okay? All right. I am going to be stamping on a half-page piece of photopaper. This one happens to be Kodak right here. And like I said, you can do this in glossy, cardstock, matte cardstock, and whatever, okay? The lighting concept is going to be the same, okay? All right, let's see if we can get this all on screen here. Okay, let's do this in landscape as well. Okay, now to get some extra trees, or utilize these trees in here, let's talk about these forms in here, okay? Now, a lot of times people are coming from, like I said in my previous video, kind of this idea of outline images, okay? So when they see a tree like this, even though it's solid, a lot of times people are still locked into the idea that this tree, is an outline design like this, okay? And they're coloring it the same way. So this one's kind of like an evergreen or a deciduous tree that's kind of flanked by evergreens like this, okay? Now, they're thinking a lot of times, if they stamp this, normally they're just stamping it out in black ink, okay? But they're thinking this, and I'll show you why I know they're thinking this, okay? But they're thinking of kind of just a straightforward type of coloring process like this, all right? And how I know that is because when they utilize a solid stamp design like this, okay, they're oftentimes, what they're doing is they're stamping it out like this, okay? Let's just stamp it on a separate piece of paper here. Okay, what they're doing is they're stamping it out like that, okay? But then when they're going in to color it, all right, they could color in the deciduous tree because I've left it open. But this is a solid tree right here, right? So they're going in like this. And they're coloring it in kind of like that, okay? Now you can do that to a certain extent, but when you have solid imagery like this, the thing that you do is you utilize the image itself, okay? Let's go ahead and ink this up again. But what you do is you take additional pens and whatnot because the object is already there, okay? The areas to color in. So the things that you're normally coloring in an outline style of design, it's open on the inside, it's absent. But this one, the pine tree branches and everything are in there. And those things are the things that would be green, okay? So they're not really having to fill them in. This isn't an outline of a tree form. Well, I'll show you what I mean when I stamp this out. It's kind of confusing. Okay, so I've colored it in black, but then did you see how I'm kind of coloring this here and there? I'm not coloring the whole thing green, but I kind of colored it here and there green. Now let's go with a lighter one, and let's utilize this kind of on the top sides of some of these branches, and for the most part, the evergreen trees right here and here, okay? So what I've done is I've colored the whole thing black, and then I've kind of applied some green here and there and there. And then with this lighter tone of green, well, this is, let me unpollute this one right here. Okay, see how this green right here is lighter than that pine green, okay? This is more like an olive green. I mean, you can use like a lemon green, light green, yellow green, or something like that. But let me show you what the difference between... Well, let's just do it right here. Well, I'll do it on here so I don't have to waste this coloring, but we'll compare this and this, okay? All right. So let's go ahead and use this one in the foreground. Okay. Okay. Now, do you see where there's green inherent in that impression? I can make it a little bit lighter. I'll do some that are a little bit lighter for you too. But see how this is already green? So the thing is, where I'm coloring those actual branches already, so I don't really have to go in here too much more with additional ink because it's not an outline of a tree with a bunch of open space on the inside. You just simply color the stamp to make the impression green. or whatever colors you're going to do it in. Okay, now let me do this a few different times because I'm going to have some more trees in here. I have the larger tree cluster, and then I'll use the smaller tree cluster here in the background. I could use, this for the background too, but since I have both, we might as well utilize that. Okay, did you see how I removed some of the ink off of the top of this stamp right here to make that stamp out a little bit lighter? Here it is darker. These are the same colors that are used, but I just wiped off some of the top of that one to make it look like the light is hitting it from above. So see, we've already given these objects right here kind of a head start in terms of lighting and dimension. They're not all just a uniform flat color. So for the most part, I left this area down here black. And then the top areas, I kind of transitioned it more into the green tones, and the very top, I might have used the lightest green like that. You don't have to use, multiple tones and values of green. You can even just use black and put a little bit of green up top there, and then wipe it off a little bit on the top, dry paper towel like that. Give your stamp an impression, and you'll have a multi-toned impression, already fully colored. You can even do things like, what I call it, shadow stamping or whatever, with trees in the background. Now that one, I don't know. That one I had already stamped out half of it, but you can see that area right here could represent a tree in the distance, okay? Okay, so anyways, we'll do that. We'll follow suit with some additional background trees in here as well, okay? And we'll do the same type of process right here. Maybe I'll make these ones slightly lighter. I'm not sure. Okay, there we have a couple different rows of trees. Maybe I can put another row back there, but let me decide if I want to add something else, kind of even more distant in the background. Maybe a distant kind of rocky peak or something of that sort might be nice. Or maybe a moon or something like that, some sky imagery. I'm not sure. There's all kinds of things you can do. There's tons of possibilities at this point in time still. But hopefully you can see the dimension that we've created on the tops of these trees already. They're kind of darker on the bottom and lighter on the top. And see, that type of lighting convention follows suit with everything in here, okay? The Stampscapes designs are, for the most part, they're bottom heavy in terms of the visual weight, because usually lighting is coming from above. So it's darker on the bottom and lighter on the top. And I've followed suit with the trees as well, okay? And, I mean, I could add some additional tone, and I will go in and add some additional color in those deciduous trees right there, okay? But for the most part, the evergreens, I don't have to color them in because they're already colored on the impressions, so you can really give yourself, you can kind of expedite the entire process, when doing that. Okay, let's add, speaking of deciduous trees, let's add in a few more of these. Into the mix. I feel like doing kind of an autumn type of color scheme, but maybe I'll stick with the kind of the more green color scheme to go with my previous lesson, and you can see how we'll employ those techniques and processes that we did in the previous lesson in an actual scene rather than in just an isolated imagery. Okay, so we have some these maples, and we can add some of these in the background like so. So see, I'm still doing that kind of green color scheme on here after an initial inking with black. I'd like to use black as kind of a base color when doing this, just so I make sure that I have ink over the entire thing. Even if the trees, in this case, are going to be, what am I trying to say? I was just thinking about this when I was doing that. Even if the trees are going to be a different color, I like to have, black as the base. When I stamp it out in only color, sometimes it looks a little bit too light and airy, without any kind of visual weight, so it's good to kind of give it a base coat of black, or just some type of dark tone, unless your scene is going to be really light, like a super foggy, misty morning or something like that, where something is kind of void of a lot of heavy shadow. Okay, so we have a lot of deciduous trees in the background like that. Okay, I can add some more in the foreground as well if I want to. I think we'll just leave it at that, though. But here, let me show you a little trick here. Okay, so that looks a little bit unbalanced. There's a lot of pine trees and evergreens right here, but then it just goes all deciduous. Okay, now maybe a smaller tree would be more ideal for this, but let's go with this same tree cluster here. And let's add some of these treetops in the background, but we're just using the smaller portion of them, okay? Like the tops. And see how I can have some more of those trees in the background, but you're just using the tops of them. Okay? I think I just lost my ability for sky back there. There's a tiny little bit of sky or a moon or something like that. I could have it peeking out over the top of that, but I don't know if I'm going to do that. Okay, but see that right there? Little top of the treetop, so it kind of balances that whole area out a little bit more. Okay. All right, so let's see. This is going to be alcohol inks on photo paper, so now's the time to really add in your imagery. I guess you could add in some foreground imagery with a StazOn pad if you're going to stamp over the top of alcohol inks, but you can't really use dye-based inks over the top of alcohol inks because it's not really going to transfer onto that alcohol coating, you know, not very well at least. Maybe it'll get a little bit of it. So I'm going to, for the most part, stamp out my entire composition right now. Foreground and all. Oftentimes I like to leave my foreground for the end. Okay, but we'll just do it now. I'm just going with some reeds and some additional leaves down here. Okay, it's reeds, large and twisting leaves. Okay, so there's our composition. Now I've chosen this particular composition because there's a lot of open area in this waterfall. We have open areas in these trees in here. In other words, there's not just a ton of solid objects in here. So I have a lot of opportunity to define light and shadow within these spaces, okay? If it's a solid, you know, a bunch of solid pine trees or something like that, I can't really add, you know, light and shadow into solid objects like this, you know, with alcohol pens or something like that. You create the light and shadow in the impressions themselves if you're going to have it, okay? Okay, so I am using alcohol pens from Marvy, and I also have some Shuttle Art pens. These are all alcohol-based, all right? So whatever alcohol pens you have. Okay, now on this scene right here, let's just go pretty basic. I'm not going to go with a kind of a bluish tinge, you know, midnight winter scene or something like that, although you could. But let's just keep it kind of more straightforward, high noon type of thing. Blue skies, blue water, gray rocks, okay? They call that local color. It's when you're kind of keeping things, yeah, at what kind of might be the the notion of the color scheme of a given object. So grass is green, sky is blue, you know, water is blue, water reflections are blue, so on and so forth, okay? Things would change greatly if it was a sunset scene or something like that, where you have a lot of different colors in the sky and reflected in water and land and so on and so forth. You know, there's different times of year. If you're out here in California, you know, during the summertime, even in the kind of pine, you know, higher elevations or something like that, chances are it's going to be really dry up there. So you would have a lot of browns, okay? All right, so that being said, what I'm doing is I'm collecting some pens that I think will be conducive for the color scheme of this scene, okay? So here's a lot of grays right here that we can use in those rocks. I have a green there. I like having a little bit of hue in my rock formations, not just gray, okay? I like a little bit of color. Could be lichen, could be moss, whatever. And then we'll do greens within these trees. But let's just start with the rocks for right now. Otherwise, I'm going to have, you know, 50 different pens out or something like that. But I've just grabbed everything. This one's my blender pen. We won't use that for right now. But see these colors right here? We have a few different values of gray. There's a brownish gray kind of looking color, green, a little bit of blue, okay? I'm going, for the most part, these are light tones, except this one gets into a little bit of a medium tone gray, maybe a medium dark, I mean like a 60% or something of that sort. Okay, so just in coloring in, let's go with the lightest one to begin with. Let me see if I have a lighter gray. I'm not sure if I do. If I don't, this one will work just fine. Here's a little bit of a warm gray, the Shuttle Art pen. Okay, now, that's a little bit too brownish of a gray. I don't want it that colorful. Yeah, that one's like colorful too. Maybe I won't use that one. That one's pretty good right there. That one's kind of more of a neutral gray, I would say. They call this cool gray. From Shuttle Art. Okay, so let's take a look at this design here. Let's take a look at the stamp design indexing too. Okay, now, so do you see where there are lights and darks within this rock formation? What I'm going to do is I'm going to color in basically everything using this super light gray. But then when I start moving up into the darker tones, like the medium tones, which I don't have too many of, it's that one medium tone gray. Also, you use that one more in the shadow areas. Now, what color is this water here? Okay, it's light, correct? So we're going to keep the things that are the lightest, including the tops of the rocks, for the most part, lighter tones, okay? So we're just following suit here. You just have to be observant on the designs themselves. Now, that's not to say you can't make things darker. I'm just kind of giving you kind of a broad kind of foundation by which to start seeing light and defining it. You can always change things around. You can have things much darker over here, if there was a big shadow or something like that coming in, or if this was a midnight scene, then you wouldn't have so much, lighting over these rocks, and you would make it darker, okay? So you do things accordingly, but so this is just kind of your basic idea, concept, which, from something that you can reference and start from. Okay, so I'm just looking at this rock right here. Now this is a very light shade of gray, okay? Like I said, you can probably barely see what I'm doing here, in fact. Okay, I can even use it in my water, too. Water tends to be very reflective of the objects and colors around it, the sky. Okay, can you see that right there? It's just a very subtle change in there. Okay. Same thing down here on these rocks. We'll give it some tone or some value. The value is very light. I'd say it's like it's probably under a 10% gray, I would say. But look at that right now. So see, now our water is standing out a little bit more. But like I said, I like to kind of blend some of this area in a little bit more. Okay, I can put it in my trees too. I'm putting it in the darker areas of the trees though, okay? I don't need to really see what I'm coloring in the trees, okay? I'm just hitting some of those shadow areas. What this does is it's just going to give a little bit of continuity between rocks, water, and foliage, okay, by having some of this color up in there. Okay, but so you can see in the lighter areas of the trees, I just kind of left them as is. I'll hit those with some kind of base color later on. But what do we have now? See, that water is really starting to stand out a little bit more, okay? Now, I'll show you some different photographs of water, because a lot of times what people do is they think of water, and they're thinking of water, and then what they do is they color it in with blue, because water is blue, right? Well, I'll show you some photographs here. But see, if I colored all my water in that color right there, what we would do is we would remove this idea of moving water and water as an element being reflective, okay? Water can have tinges of blue, and we'll use that in here, but we don't darken it out. We want that water to remain kind of as light or lighter than the surrounding areas, especially where it's falling, okay? Okay, I think that's it with this gray here. Let's go to this warm gray. It's a little bit warmer. It's almost, I don't know what color that is. But we can use some of it. Now see, I'm kind of hitting the shadow areas a little bit more. I don't want this everywhere, but I might want a tinge of kind of warmth within those rocks, especially in the shadows. Like this. You don't need to worry about blending and everything like that. We'll blend this in later, okay? But I'm not adding it everywhere, okay? See how it's being a little bit more kind of shadow-based, okay? See this right down here? And where are the shadows? Just look at the design. Where the shadows are darker. So I've given you all this information in the designs themselves. If you choose to, you can just kind of follow that as a guide. So what you do is you kind of learn the basics here. you kind of utilize the designs as your kind of foundation and to take your cues from. But then, yeah, you go ahead and break out of that. In future scenes, you'll decide, it's a little bit too light over there. Then just darken it all out. You don't have to go along with the design kind of lighting schemes that are kind of built into the images. Okay, so see that right down there? So those rocks are starting to look a little bit more dimensional, aren't they? They're not blended in, but I don't do that with alcohol inks at this point in time. I blend them in later with the blender pen or lighter tones, and that's pretty fun, and it's a really great opportunity and ability. Okay, now let's add this up into these trees. Again, for that continuity, I like a little bit of brown and kind of whatever kind of color scheme I'm working in. It just makes it a little bit more earthy looking and natural than just having only hue of whatever object we're working in kind of incorporated into it, okay? So see those trees in the background are kind of a little bit more related to the rocks down here. Now they're going to turn, okay, later on. So these are just foundation coats. So don't worry about that when you're doing it. Sometimes people kind of panic when they see this kind of something in progress. If they can't kind of at least kind of get the gist of where something's going, you don't have to be able to see it happening as you go along, but just kind of stick with it and kind of develop your pieces as it goes along. And you'll start seeing it come together kind of later on in the process. I can kind of visualize it a little bit, but even me, I don't know exactly what this is going to look like. Okay, this is a light blue. It's super light. It's practically clear. Okay, now I want my water surface to remain nice and light. Okay, but I am getting some of this color down there. Okay, it's just a little tiny tinge of blue. Maybe I'll do that for the sky as well. I am picking up some of the colors that I've already laid down. Okay, but I'm not really worried about that. If it is kind of smearing or blobbing or something like that at this point in time, because you just kind of go in and blend it in later on anyway. Okay, get a little of that in this water up here. I can put it into some of my falling water. Okay, I'm just not making it super dark blue. Okay. All right. So barely visible. We'll return to this blue later, though, okay? Okay, this is a little bit of a medium blue. Let me see if I have a little bit of a lighter blue. Blue-gray. That looks pretty good. That was really light, too. I think that's a good one. Blue-gray. In fact, why don't we add this up into these rocks? I think that looks great. It barely shows, but that's why it's kind of great. Yeah, it's easy to use when something barely shows. It's just a touch darker than what you've already kind of laid down. See, I'm kind of adding this in the shadow areas. Hopefully that looks like it's becoming a little bit more dimensional. I mean, it's ever so slightly, because this is ever so slightly darker than what I've already laid down. It's not very visible. So kind of adding some shadows right at the base of those trees. Getting that. Now that rock there was fairly light, but there's a lot of trees over here, so I'm kind of saying in this darker tone that I'm adding at the base of them that those trees are casting a shadow. So you don't always have to just stick exactly with the images. They're just kind of a suggestion, in terms of your lighting and coloring possibilities. Okay. All right, coming around. It's really different looking at these scenes just colored in alcohol inks. I usually don't do this, so just kind of getting the feel of it still. I mean, I've just started kind of doing this last week. I've tried it before on a mood and media piece, and the thing about that one was there was too much, big areas. There's a little bit too much area here in the water, too. I should have added some other imagery in there, like a cloud reflection or something. But this will do. Okay, now these look terrible right here, but that's where I'll blend them in later, okay? But see this? It's not all just one value of blue in there. There's gray and other blues, and I'm doing this streaky type of thing, so it's not all just kind of a uniform application of color in any given space. Okay? Now don't forget about this part of it. A lot of people just see kind of the end result. Maybe they don't watch the videos all the way through, because sometimes people tell me, oh, they got to an area, but if they didn't watch my video, they wouldn't have seen how mine looked at whatever given moment in time, and that it didn't look, resolved and kind of, I don't know, finished by any means during a big portion of the entire process, okay? It's like these are all kind of just foundation colors. Okay, did you see where I'm bringing this blue into those rocks? I don't want it to look like these rocks are underwater or something like that, but I do want to give them something in common with that blue water, blue sky. Okay. All right. Now, see these really kind of awkward streaks in here? Let's go in and blend those out a little bit. I'm going in with my lighter tone of blue. And this is one of those really fun things. Now, it wouldn't have gotten so streaky if I was kind of sponging in color with dye-based inks or something like that. So this isn't something that I'm normally having to do with that media. But with markers, they are kind of fine-tipped. These ones are the brush markers right here, so they do give a little bit of a streak. But a lot of times people ask that and they think, oh my god, they associate streaks with bad, with alcohol inks. But I'm utilizing those streaky kind of textures for my water texture. In nature, you don't have to worry about something leaving streaks, because streaks and texture, maybe not streaks, but just texture in general, are good. Okay? So I'm kind of brushing away some of those blue streaks that I laid down there. This is kind of like dissolving it and putting it back into solution. But look at all this. See, I love that type of texturing like that. It's almost like kind of watercolors, and I'm terrible at watercolors, but you can get kind of those moving types of textures in here. See, I can go in here and I can kind of bring light back into the darkness too, like this, just by dissolving some of that alcohol ink that's already been laid down. We can do that on tops of these rocks too. So this rock in here, how it's dark, well, I can go back and give it some extra dimension by, see that, how that's removing that ink right there? So now there's a little bit more dimension in it. There's a little bit of light in there. Okay? You kind of have to kind of dab in there and really define some of those light areas or textures within that given space. Okay, so that looks good down there in the water. Let's go ahead and do that up in the sky as well. really going in and removing a lot of those streaks. But just, this is kind of pushing them around. It's not like an eraser. It's kind of like dissolving it and moving that ink around and about. You might be erasing some of it, like it gets on this, and I just kind of wipe it off like that. Okay. So that is that. Let's go in and let's see, which way do we want to go? Let's add a little bit more depth to those rocks. Let's go to our medium. Oh gosh, I always hope I wasn't working off screen that whole time. All right, here is a medium tone gray, okay? It's much darker than the previous gray right here, okay? So what do? We're looking for opportunities, shading opportunities down here, okay? Maybe I should have added this in before I did that blending so I could blended this color in as well, but let's just kind of hit this in those darkest of areas. You just kind of go over those areas that are fairly dark with your darkest of tones that you're going to be using. I'm not going to go all the way to black. I don't think I need to. So you can hit it in the shadows over here, around these rocks. There's shadows up in the trees. Now look at down here especially. We can make these boulders with lichen really kind of dimensional with some additional tone. I might need to go with a little bit of a darker one. Or is that dark enough? Yeah, we'll decide when we get there. When we're done with this one, if we want to go darker. Okay, but see, I'm not coloring in this whole thing. All right? You're kind of utilizing your darker tones for your darker areas. And then you're just kind of winging it too a little bit, because light isn't just in one spot. There's shadows and light. There's clouds that go in front of the sun. So different areas are going to look a little bit different. Okay, see, there's little things too. If you want this rock right here to stand out, then you make the rock behind it darker, okay? You've heard me talk about checkerboarding if you've watched these videos in the past. Kind of the oscillation of light and darks within a given space to kind of give range and value and, I don't know, just contrasts across a given area or object to lend itself to just kind of a richer looking surface, potentially. All right, so look at those rocks right there. Aren't they nice and dimensional now? Okay. I'm looking for my really light gray. Here we go. Oh, this is a blender one. I just want to blend this in a little bit more. Oh, look at this, just a little bit. Or no, this is green. No, it's my blender pen. It just has some green in it from yesterday. I like that green. There's a little tinge of green there, so let's add a little bit of green. How about to these foreground rocks at least? Maybe you can see a little bit of tinge of green in them from moss or, I don't know, something like that. Algae. It doesn't have to make sense, it just has to look good. Whatever looks good, Anything that looks good goes in stamping, okay? So is that little tinge of green in there? Okay, let's color in some of these trees here now, okay? Okay, so I'm coloring, for the most part, the deciduous trees that are in between the evergreens. We're going up here into the maple pears. Coloring up pretty good. I mean, if you want to color in the whole thing, you can. But the thing is, we did those little spot coloring types of touches with those other colors and darker colors, okay? So this is just a very light, super pale green. Okay, so we've done that with the green. Now let's go into our alcohol pens, and let's see what greens we might use in here. I don't know if I'll go this bright. This one's really bright right here. Let's see if we can find something else. Here's a pine green. They call that pine green. We'll see. But here's a few different ranges of green. There are different temperatures of green as well, but let's see this darker one. This one's a little bit darker too. It's very bright as well, but these ones will be, for the most part, in the shadows. And these two can be over the whole thing or in any part of them, okay? This is like, I don't know, like a mustard green or something like that. It's called yellow green, but super bright. See that right there? Now that doesn't look good, but that's not what it's going to look like though, because we're just going to blend it in. This is where people panic. Because when you're doing kind of outline styles of design, coloring, you know, things don't go kind of out of focus and out of whack like that, you know, with a weird kind of color. But this is just kind of like blending in. You're just kind of laying down some color to blend it in later. Okay. Now I'll do the same type of concept with dye-based inks, but I'm just, I don't know, I'm having fun kind of experimenting with the alcoholing, so I want to get enough material down for people to reference as just another option for utilizing their Stampscapes stamps. But we want to really kind of, you know, go into it with a certain degree of, I hesitate to say control, but kind of confidence in what something like photopaper can do. There are certain types of properties to it in that a lot of the inks stay very surface oriented. Okay, now we're going with a bit of that darker tone of green, so I'm adding that green in those shadow areas. Where are the shadow areas? Okay, let's take a look here. So those darker areas right here, so I'm coloring it here, here. So a little line here and here. If it's the maple pear, you can see those darker areas at the base of the tree. Sorry about the focus. Right in here, here, like that. If you go a little bit into the lighter areas, that's not going to matter. I am. But just in general, okay? I'm hitting those lighter areas. I mean, darker areas with the darker tones, okay? And I go into the light areas with the lightest of tones. Okay, now I feel that we do need a little bit of brightness in the scene, so let's go on with a pine green. Pine green is pretty bright, okay? I didn't say light, I meant bright in terms of kind of the intensity of it. Okay, so hit it here and there. What I'm doing is I'm doing like these little scumbling marks, and I'm kind of hitting it in some of those shadow areas. So I'm almost like laying down a little dab of, if it was paint there, and then what I'll do is I'll spread that around with the blending tool. Okay. Okay, so we have that. Little spots of color everywhere. See that? They're like little puddles of that bright green, and then I'll drag them out and blend them in with, let's go with the lightest of green right now, and then maybe we'll use our blender pen for it as well. So you just kind of go in there and just kind of mix them together. That's how I've come to use it over this last week. People that have been using pens and really know their techniques, there might be a much easier way to accomplish what I'm doing, so you can learn from them as far as that goes. But as far as the concept goes on volumes and lighting and kind of visual weight, you can take from this lesson and then, I don't know, figure out how to color from someone else that really knows what they're doing and who is not me. I don't know, maybe that's good that I'm doing it though, and you're learning from me, because if I don't really know, then I'm kind of like right where kind of everyone else is in the process. So you can tell it's, yeah, if I was an expert on pens or something like that, and alcohol pens, and I probably wouldn't know what to talk about in terms of a basic lesson. A basic lesson on alcohol ink use. Okay, so anyways, you see where that's kind of mixing in there? It's a little bit more kind of abstract, but you can see the lights and darks within those trees, right? It oscillates. There's not just one solid value of green in them. Okay, so let's go in again, and let's bring in our blender tool. Okay, this gives my lightest of areas within those trees a light green. Now let's go in and really push that a little bit more with something lighter than light, which is clear, okay? But I can really reveal some of those light areas in here. This is also kind of blending everything. But see, I can see on here where we can use some variation just because it's getting a little bit boring in terms of everything being uniform. So I just do this little spot of light in here. See, it's like I'm just revealing certain areas of light, okay? It's doing a little bit of blending as well, but I did most of my blending with that other green. Okay. Alright, let's go down here. Let's take a look at this tree. See, there's not too much variation in this, right? But the thing about the alcohol inks is I can go in like this. This is what I would be doing just with something like a paint pen or a gel pen to reveal kind of the lighter areas, but with the alcohol inks you can actually, on alcohol inks on photopaper that is, you can actually go in and add those highlights back into those areas. Now see that? Isn't there a lot more variation in there? And it looks like the light is illuminating that tree. Alright, I think that looks okay. So far so good. Do we want to go in to that green here and add a little bit more dimension back into some of these rocks, maybe? This rock right here, I think I want to make much lighter, at least on a part of it, like it's capturing some of that light. So you see how I just keep working it like that, and it kind of removes it. It's what's really fun about using photo paper. It just, you can kind of puddle it up, and kind of the more of that blending fluid that you release on there, the more kind of bleached out that area becomes, revealing those lighter areas. Okay, right in here I'm going to reveal a little bit of a horizon glow of lightness. Okay, so I'm removing some of that blue like that. Okay, we'll blend that out a little bit. I'll say the light is kind of coming from the horizon there. All right. Okay, now let's go into that water there. I said that water isn't just colored in like this, okay? But it is looking a little bit bare, so let's go in and add a little tinge of some color into it, okay? But for the most part, leave it pretty light, okay? Something like that. And then go in and blend that. Is it blended out or blended in? I'm not sure. I think blended in with the surrounding areas. Okay. Make some of this water a little bit lighter. Alright, there we have it. fairly large scene. Let's add in those special effects or embellishments as we did on the previous lesson, and really push lighting and depth, spatial distance even further. Okay. Okay, we want to make these objects look very rounded, okay? And as I mentioned in my previous video, but if you didn't watch that, everything that we see in life has highlights. Look at all these highlights right here. The brighter the more reflective the object, the brighter the highlight typically, you know. Okay, you can see it on here too. Like a bottle like this has these highlights like that. Where is it? It's on the top surfaces of whatever direction the lighting is coming from. Let's look at a black stamp pad, okay, like this. Well, what color is that highlight right there? Okay, it's really quite light, right? So you can put, the opportunity for highlights is there with just about anything, okay? You don't have to analyze it though, okay? All you have to do is look on these rocks right here, and if they're not in complete darkness or something like that, then if you want to, you can put some highlights on there, but you certainly don't have to. Everything's already kind of rendered. This kind of pushes it one extra step though, and I'd really recommend kind of practicing this and getting it down, because it can really add a really nice, fun, and easy application of texture within your scenes. Okay, so the top sides are some rocks like this. Okay, so you kind of cluster your dots like that, and then you kind of dissipate it. You know, you transition it out like that. Okay, it looks weird. It's going to look weird if you just put it on one. You kind of have to have that texturing and lighting going on throughout the piece. Okay, but see that rock right there? Let's hold it up here a little bit more so you can see it. Okay, see that right there? It's capturing that light, but when you look at it at arm's distance, it's not like, oh my gosh, you know, there's a bunch of dots everywhere. Okay, now some areas it's not going to show up because it's just too light. You know, white on white is not going to show up, but white on a little bit darker starts to show up. It really shows up in the darker areas. You know, you can put a couple little dots in there if you want to, though. See this cluster of rocks right back in here? They're fairly dark, so I'm just going to put a couple little dots on them like so accordingly. This really is a lot of fun to do, okay? Let's see if there you can see any kind of difference between this side and this side. It's fairly subtle because the scene isn't very dark and these dots don't stand out super well. But it's just kind of an extra texture, and what I say in a lot of my videos is that if someone's looking at your scene, or you're looking at your own scene, you want it to look good at regular viewing distance, but it's kind of nice if you reward your viewer of your card, in many cases the recipient of your card, you reward them for further inspection if they hold it up and kind of really start to appreciate all the different areas in your scene and the little techniques that stand out and kind of put it over the top, I would say. You reward someone for doing that inspection, for really looking closely and kind of appreciating the little nuances. Now, it's not that all these different little touches are kind of microscopic and you wouldn't notice it. I mean, you know, that's pretty noticeable right there. Look at these little dots like that. Watch me do it in the water here as well, okay? Hold it at arm's distance, though. Remember to, as you're doing this, we're getting very detail-oriented, so take a look at arm's distance and see how it's affecting the overall. Okay, but here we go. So this little sparkling little specular light, kind of flashes of color, lighting. Okay, now, this is what I did in my video yesterday too. On the top surfaces of these trees, you can see where it's darker down here and lighter up here, right? So on the top edge, you put a few little dots like that. It doesn't show up on one, but you're doing it consistently over the whole scene. It doesn't mean that it's going to take forever. You know, some areas it's like one dot. But isn't that really making these volumes look even more dimensional by having that little kind of area on the top of these really reflective of light? It kind of sparkles. You know, those leaves really capture that light. Okay, let's see it right here. Okay, let's take a look at it down here. I'll show you where it is on these, the trees right here, okay? Dark on the base of this, lighter on top. Dark at the base, lighter on top, so on and so forth, okay? So, where it looks like right here, light, 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 and light, okay? Just the lighter areas. We're not putting it in the shadow areas because highlighting is the opposite of that, okay? Doesn't that make that tree look a lot more dimensional like that? See that right there? It kind of makes it shimmer. And it also introduces kind of an area of light in that darkness, so it's kind of fun. Okay, let's take a look at these rocks down here and do the same thing. I really love adding textures to my rocks and kind of a reflective quality to them. The rocks are already kind of textured in terms of the design. So adding extra texture in the form of light, it's not really light, but it represents light, adds that extra little touch to make those rocks so much more dimensional and nuanced and, I don't know, detailed. You can do this in different colors too, you know, on these rocks like that to represent lichen, or you can do moss on them. Let's take a look at this rock. Okay, see, it doesn't really show anything too much, but you start moving in like that, and you can see all those little details in there. Can you see those little white dots? Let me change, yeah. My camera's kind of overexposing a little bit here. Okay, let's see. Yeah, there's some dots in here. Like I said, it doesn't show up in the real light areas, but see it in here. Not over here, but right in here. In the lightest of areas. In the shadows, I don't really put too many highlights. Okay, so that is the white paint pen. Maybe I'll have some splashes down here in the water like this. Look how much that really shows up. Quite a bit. You add a little bit more down in the lighter areas, and then you should move away from it. You use less. I don't know if I've used my Dr. Martens bleed-proof white on the photo paper yet. I'm not sure. Adding some little sparkles in my water. Okay. This is Dr. Martens bleed-proof white. Trying to decide if I want to use that now or after the white pigment ink. Now this isn't kind of shading in light, but the splatter painting of this opaque white watercolor paint in a scene really adds a lot of dimension and texture to a piece, and light because it's white. But I really love it in waterfalls or as stars in sky, for my skies. It could just represent kind of a, I don't know, pollen in the air too. With so many allergies going around, especially with the kids these days, maybe pollen in the air isn't so much of a good kind of a reference for them. Okay, so at the base of the waterfall, I'm going to splatter paint some of this Dr. Martin's in. Now, I'm holding this up just so you can see it. Normally, I would just have it down here, but my hand's going to be covering it up so you can't see it, so I'm holding it like this. It's not a technique type of thing, holding it like that. Okay, maybe you can see it over here a little bit more. Maybe that wouldn't be splashing this far, but I really like it as a texture. See, I've even put some of it over here. But that's what that looks like right there. I don't know. I mean, there's some waterfalls in the background. You wouldn't see that splashing, but let's put a little bit of light back in there and just to add a little bit of texture. Like maybe even in those trees like this. I'll splatter paint it over everything. Let's even do a little bit down here. It's a great texture. No, it doesn't make any sense, but maybe it's, like I said, maybe it's pollen or something like that. See that right there? Those little textures like that? I mean, you hold it up and it doesn't really read, but I don't know, it kind of gives those two areas something in common. I did splatter paint it a little bit up there, too. But hopefully this is looking real dimensional, okay? And it's just, it's not that hard, okay? You just don't color everything in uniform. You got to put on the brakes, so you don't do everything uniformly. Only color that uniform color in a very light tone, super light green over trees, super light gray over the whole thing. But then you just start utilizing your darker tones in the darker areas. And they do start getting into the light areas, but then you just, in photopaper, you just blend it in. Okay, that gave a lot of dimension and kind of spatial distance to the scene. Let's grab my cotton ball and white pigment ink. Okay, let's do this. I'll take a photograph of kind of the existing area without it. Okay, cotton ball. Kind of a dry ink pad, white pigment ink pad. All right, mine's dry. Yeah, it's medium dry at least. I can get this pretty soaked if I want to, but your pad could be very, very juicy, okay? We don't want that application of super juicy pigment ink on here, okay? We want it to be very dry. So if your pigment ink pad is really super juicy, just give it a couple taps like that. Don't squeeze into it, okay? And take off most of it. I'm talking about 95%, okay? Where when you start utilizing it, it's going to be barely visible, or actually not visible at all. That's where I want you to get your pad, okay? Or your, I don't know, cotton ball. Your cotton ball kind of turns into a pad. Okay, now watch this. See that? How it barely shows. And I'm just touching it, okay? A lot of people are going to do this. Oh, I can't see it. And then they squeeze it out and they get a big blob and they say, oh my god, I can't do that technique. It happens all the time. What you're doing is you're just barely touching this. Kind of get it to where after 20 taps, you can start to see it. See that right there? Now watch it right here. See, nothing. And I didn't count. That's like 15 taps right there. And see, it's starting to barely show up, okay? That's what you want. See, when people use media again, they expect the full version of something immediately, like coming out of the pen. If I draw with this, they're used to that tone of ink, okay? But they're not used to using kind of weaker versions of different media. So it's kind of foreign, and I understand that too, just from so much repetition and kind of built up knowledge that someone might have. But check this out down here at the base of the waterfalls, and how we can really make that waterfall and that water churn down there and give it that misty feel. Look at that right there. And isn't that adding a lot of dimension to the piece? So this rock right here, it's really pretty dark, but I can put it in mist like that. You can add a little bit more. See that rock right there? It's very defined, and I just put a little bit over it. You don't have to cover everything. But now look at that. Isn't that so much more dimensional? In the lighter area down here, the water, let's go ahead and use a pretty good portion of this, okay? Maybe I didn't get it blended in as nicely as I wanted to. I certainly didn't get my sky blended in very well. It's kind of ugly. But I know from doing this before that this just solves everything, so let's go into that sky area. See, and I can just subdue things. The things that are the weakest areas, I just subdue it by just kind of toning over it. I mean, in scenic stamping too, you know, you can just stamp a big branch over something that you don't like if it's a weak spot. But here, so now those trees that I'm putting this over, don't they look more distant now? It looks more distant and kind of atmospheric. Okay, see that? Don't those look way off in the distance now? Okay, you can have some mist kind of within some trees. I left a little bit of that lighter area there. I don't know. It wasn't intentional, but where it is, I'll just kind of add this as though it's lighter because there's some kind of illuminated mist in there. Okay. At the distant part of the waterfall, maybe I can put a little pigment ink out that way. At the base of these trees for a little bit of variation. Okay, look at that, really kind of making that scene kind of glow. Okay, now where this is light in here, let's put a little bit of lighting. Remember how we've toned, wiped off some of the ink off some of these foreground trees on the top? Or we've just colored a lighter version of that green up top. Let's put a little bit of light onto them. Doesn't it make those trees look a little bit more dimensional, like they're turning in space? They're more dimensional and not flat. And what is it? See, like this one right here. It goes from a little bit more two-dimensional looking to suddenly a little bit more three-dimensional, because you've just made it a little bit lighter on one side. On these trees, little tip, see that this area in here is light, so on the left side of these trees, I'm applying some of this tone. Well, this one right here, it's right on the top. But on this tree right here, I've applied it to the right side, because the lighting is coming from, you know, to the right of it. See that right there? But look at this glow now that we have kind of working in the scene. Toning down that rock right in there a little bit. This kind of disappears too. You have to kind of apply a little bit more than you think you're going to need. It's hard to tell sometimes, you know, just how much this kind of darkens when the pigment ink dries. But that's kind of a good thing too, because let's say you don't like something. Oh my gosh, I made it too light. You know, it'll darken when it dries. So. And you can always apply more if it darkens too much. It becomes, when I say darken, it doesn't turn from white to something else. It just becomes a little bit more transparent. And the tones that you've drawn underneath it, that you've colored underneath it, show through a lot easier or stronger. All right, a kind of a nice, shimmery, glowing waterfall scene. And it's pretty fun. It was fun to do with the alcohol inks. I really like the texturing and whatnot. So let's take a look at this here. Okay, so hopefully this looks very dimensional. We've still retained the areas of light and dark within our waterfall. There's a lot of areas of light and dark within this rock. Hopefully that looks more dimensional than this one does. Because we've addressed it with some additional tones and inks and colors. Textures too. And there's all those trees up there. It kind of becomes kind of a big, just kind of amorphic shape going on in the background like that. But hopefully it reads as dimensional foliage, there, where it comes out, and there's kind of rounded forms within those areas in that space, okay, as opposed to a very flat type of coloring that would kind of eradicate that notion of depth within the imagery. And going into it with the white paint pen for some additional touches. It doesn't show up quite as much, the lighter it is, but I think those little touches in there do kind of add up to the overall textural strategies of this piece, especially up in these trees right here, those little white areas like that. Let's put a couple more right here. Let's make that one a little bit more dimensional. I like a little bit more, a few more dots, I think. Maybe it's kind of flowering foliage as opposed to just highlights too. But I do keep it a little bit more top surface oriented for, to represent dimension first. Oh, almost forgot. One of the things I can do here too is I can go in and define some of those tree trunks a little bit more. It's kind of hard to see them a little bit, but you can just kind of draw them in. You don't have to stay right on the lines or anything like that. You can kind of see them a little bit here and there. Okay, yeah. These little tree trunks in there. Don't they stand out so much more with this white paint pen? And let's see if I can see. I don't really see too much of the tree trunks in here either. It's kind of becomes a little bit busy, so. I'll put a couple in there. It's very subtle, but it's little lines like that. Okay, so anyways, lesson number 2. It's kind of a big page, but I wanted to get a lot of forms within this space so I can really reiterate kind of what we're going after. It's the same concept in here. It's the darker tones in the darker areas and the lighter highlights on the top surfaces of things, you know, where something is being top illuminated. And like I said, this is just one way to do things, and it's just to kind of get you started on scene dimensions. Things will change all the time. You can definitely make certain areas darker. You know, there could be a tree or something like, you know, over here, or a mountain. And this whole area right here can just be in shadow or something like that. But again, these are just little cues, you know, to take that you can kind of follow, you know, the shadows drawn into the designs that you can just reiterate with color. So I'm not just coloring right here with darker tones. I'm kind of coming out into here a little bit, and then you just kind of blend it in with the blending, you know, pen or whatnot. Or if you're doing dye-based inks, which I'll do sometime, you just, you know, you color in those darker areas, and you know, you can't go back in and blend them in with a, you know, a blender pen or something like that, but you can add those highlights. Okay, so here's another scene that I've done in the past, and this is just matte, a glossy cardstock with all dye-based inks, and you can see the different textures in here. This is the same tree cluster stamp, but I just did that pink foliage area in there instead. And here's the same Babbling Brook in here, but you can still see the lights and darks within those forms like that. Okay. All right, so much fun. That's really a fun scene to do. And playing around with alcohol inks. I'm really having fun time with the alcohol inks. I know I've been experimenting so much, I really want to use everything now, which is the problem, I guess. Or I don't know. I guess that's a good problem to have. I feel like doing matte cardstock with black pigment ink and so on and so forth. And maybe we'll do that. We'll do something like just black pigment ink on matte paper, and we'll really define those forms. And that would be a really super fast process to do, because you're just using black. You're not going on with all these different colors like that. So maybe that's what I'll be doing next. But hopefully you're kind of established, and at least with the gist and strategies going forward with depicting things in a very dimensional and illuminated way as far as kind of developing your lighting scheme. Okay, if you have any questions, drop me a note in the comment section, and I hope you liked this video. If you did, hope you press the like button and you share and subscribe. Thanks for watching.